Do you ever catch yourself saying, English is just crazy? Maybe your students come across a tricky word and you tell them, you just have to memorize that one, or this is the part you have to know by heart. But deep down, you know it's still confusing. Here's the truth. English isn't random. It's a wonderfully complex system, and once you understand how that system works, through sound, structure, and meaning, everything changes. That's what Sarah, Paul, and I teach inside Mastering Morphology. This isn't another curriculum. It's deep teacher knowledge inside a practical, comprehensive course that finally shows you how words really work. No more exceptions, no more gimmicks or patching holes with memorization or phonics alone. It's time to go beyond sound it out and give your students the framework they need to truly understand words. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start teaching with confidence, join us inside Mastering Morphology. Enrollment is open now, so we invite you to click the link in the show notes to get started. You're listening to episode 72 of Literacy in Color. Today, we're joined by someone whose work has shaped literacy policy, practice, and instructional design at every level of the educational system, Dr. Jennifer Throndsen. She's spent more than 20 years of education serving as a classroom teacher, instructional coach, district specialist, state-level administrator, adjunct faculty member, consultant, and even author. Jennifer's expertise lies in building, implementing, and monitoring evidence-based literacy initiatives that actually change outcomes for kids. Work that she's done in multilingual contexts, high-need schools, district offices, and at the state level. In this conversation, Jennifer shares powerful research, actionable scaffolding strategies, and compelling real-world examples. And she shares how challenging texts paired with the right supports can dramatically change the trajectory for readers who are far below grade level. So if you're interested in hearing more about scaffolding strategies to help students access challenging texts, here's to the next hour of Raising Up Readers. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. Today, we have the pleasure of chatting with Jennifer Throndsen, and she is an author of a recently published book called Raising Up Readers, 25 Scaffolding Strategies to Help Students Access Challenging Texts. And today, we're going to be tackling some of the nuance between all of the different texts that students may encounter in a day and why it's important to have a bit of that challenging text and how we can support readers in such a way. So first of all, welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Thank you. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. And it was so nice running into you at the Reading League recently.
I know. It was nice to meet you in real life.
Yeah, we got that encounter before hitting record. So I'm appreciative of that. So can you briefly share your background in literacy and how your authorship of this book came to be?
Absolutely. So I started out as a first grade teacher. I was trained over 20 years ago. So that first grade experience, I didn't know phonics. I had a phonics program that I was given. And so I would point to letters and ask children what they said. Luckily, I had enough kids who knew phonics. I learned phonics through children. I don't recommend that, but that was my beginning of the reading journey. I taught first grade for a number of years and then moved to Alaska to become the multilingual learner coordinator. Did that for a few years, went back in the classroom because I missed kids and chose a failing Title I school with a population that was 40% proficient in fourth grade in reading, and we ended the year at 96. So I'm a believer that all kids can, given quality instruction and using what I learned from the science of reading to make that happen. And a lot of those strategies actually are in the book as part of kind of my journey to this product of my journey as a science of reading learner. And then I became an instructional coach, moved back to my home state of Utah and did that for a bit, and then went into district office to be the language arts specialist for our school district. Then I moved to the state level, the state literacy coordinator for pre-K through 12, did that for 5 years, and then became the director of teaching and learning for the state of Utah, did that for 5 years, and that was over educator preparation, educator licensing, and all the core standards. I'm a recovering state representative, and so I left that about a year ago to open my own educational consulting company and to finish the book during that time, really in the way of wanting teachers to know that research evidence says if we put kids in challenging texts, we can accelerate their learning progress. But many of us were trained to match kids to text, and that matching, if I did it well enough, would be the magic to opening up their reading journey. There's so many studies that are contrary to that belief and training that many of us have received. And so I was, encouraging teachers in my role at the state level to engage kids in grade level text, to engage them in more challenging material than they can handle independently, or even matching them to text. And teachers were like, they were willing, but they didn't know how to go about that work. And so that's where the idea for the book came. I started doing professional learning on the topic, and teachers were just so excited and were like, okay, I can do this. This is doable. And I just wanted to create more opportunities. I can't meet and do PD with every teacher. And so it was just a great way to say, here, let me share those ideas with others through a book.
That is really powerful. And I love your journey. That's an incredible background that you have there with all of those different roles. And I especially love hearing about that data shift in Alaska that you got to experience, because that feels very empowering, I think, for those listening to see that those kinds of changes are possible. And I love the story behind your book. And it's true, you're only on one person. So for this to be in the hands of many is such a gift. And you mentioned teachers having this common practice of matching students to particular leveled books. And we're used to these phrases, independent level or instructional level, frustrational level. Sometimes you sit down with a student for half an hour trying to figure out those levels, maybe even more. You mentioned that this approach isn't backed by research. So can you explain why it's flawed to try to match students into leveled texts?
Absolutely. Basically, we've been relying on that principle of, if I find that just right text, if I sit down with that kid, I did the DRA for years, and find, they're a level J, and I put them in level J books, then I have done my job as a teacher. I just have to give them more of those books until they show me some magic that we're ready for K. And really, that's not how it works. And so I like to compare it to lifting weights. If I go to the gym and I can lift 15 pounds for my bicep curl, but I want to do 20, you don't keep me in 15 pounds. You put me in 20, you let me do what I can in that 20, and then you come along as the scaffold, the spotter, and you push up on my elbows just enough to get me over that breaking point of, okay, I made it through the curl. And that's the scaffolding teachers can provide, is giving that extra little push to get them over those difficult parts so they can do that more challenging reading. But if we really want kids to be able to read more challenging text, they have to read more challenging text. And that doesn't mean I just throw them in and hope for the best. It means I have to scaffold them and support them. Just like in the gym with my coach is going to be there to spot me. Or if I'm doing a bench press and I can't quite do the weight they've given me, they're going to be there with their hands ready in case I can't get it. And they might even just put a couple of fingers on and give me a push and get me up over that hump. We can do the same thing in the classroom. In the past, we've been using the text to mediate the difficulty instead of using our skills as a teacher to mediate the difficulty of a text. And that is the role that needs to change. We are the mediation of difficult text as the educator. And the text is not how we match our children. It's how do we think about what are their background knowledge? How difficult is the vocabulary? How complex is the sentence structure? What do I do to help mitigate those challenges? Not take them away, but mitigate them so that they can jump that hurdle, that they can lift that bench press bar, that they can do that 20-pound bicep curl. I really realized that as the multilingual coordinator in Alaska, I came in and I had been a first grade teacher. And so I was 25 in district office. well unprepared and probably somewhat incompetent at the time. Learned a lot in those few years, but we went from 25% of kids making progress or obtaining proficiency to 75% in 2 years. And that was because I went in and I asked teachers, we had a staff of about 19, and I asked them, what are you doing to support the MLs? We're at that 25% of kids were making progress. And so just kind of wanted to get informed. I was new to Alaska. What were we working? And so typically they were doing vocabulary that wasn't connected to classroom instruction. We were kind of doing random things here or there, but it really wasn't supporting the kids in accessing core. And so we shifted that pretty quickly and said, okay, we're going to front load. We're going to pre-teach some of the things they need for core instruction so that when their teacher delivers core instruction, they have some knowledge, some information, some vocabulary, some concepts to bring into the classroom to feel more successful, to feel more engaged and more motivated. And within 2 years, 75% of them were making progress or obtaining proficiency. And that was the major change. We made a lot of changes, but that was the most significant change. And that came because I was watching these kids that were in 10th grade at the time reading in second grade text, because that's what they could read as a multilingual learner. And it caused some kind of dissonance with my training and my experience, saying, how are they ever going to get to 10th grade level text if I only put them in second grade reading material? And that's a pretty big gap, right? Like, how do you close that gap? Closing that gap by having them continue to read what they can read didn't make sense to me. And so I kind of had to confront my training, my beliefs, my practice, and we had to try something different. And luckily that worked. I learned years later why it worked. Like, the research is like, yes, when you put kids in more challenging texts and scaffold them, they grow at more accelerated rates than when we match them to text. And so that's a long way of saying we have had the instructional level, we've had the independent level, and there's still time for independent reading. But instructional level is whatever I can do to scaffold the text that can make it instructional. And so frustrational level text can still be appropriate for instruction. It's just about the scaffolding that I provide.
Yeah. And I think your analogy in terms of working out makes it really easy to understand, because there's this theory, you look at your classroom full of students with all of these diverse needs, and you know that a one size fits all lesson isn't going to meet necessarily all their needs. And so you think, well, obviously, if I just put them in a text that is at their level, I'm helping them. But it has this Matthew effect of the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, because you're never closing the gap. You're never doing anything to accelerate the learning by keeping them in that quote unquote just right book. And I love a quote in your book. It's actually on page 8. It says, it isn't about matching the text to the student. It's about identifying what instructional strategies teachers can leverage to create an optimal and challenging learning experience. And I thought that was really powerful. And I think about the idea of equity. Can you speak to why giving students access to grade level text is so important?
Absolutely. So thinking about that equity angle, if we want to create equity, kids need access to grade level content, grade level ideas, grade level vocabulary, grade level sentence structure. They need to grapple with the syntactical, semantic structures of language that's at that grade level. And so if we don't give kids the opportunity, even kids who don't read at that grade level yet, they don't have access to that. They don't get to build their abilities to be able to navigate those complexities, because the text that they're in doesn't have those complexities. And so we're actually building a bigger gap along the way by preventing them from engaging in that. So, in that work with the multilinguals, we really took that time to say, how are we going to make that gap close? How are we going to say this second grade reader who's in fourth grade? And that's where, I went and taught fourth grade at the time. I had 7 kids that read like second graders. By the end of the year, they read like fifth graders, which was awesome. But we only read grade level text other than for fluency practice. Then we were trying to get instructional because that's what the research says. But for actual everyday reading, we read grade level text, and I scaffolded them into that text so that they could have access. I could have easily said, oh, you're not going to read the main selection that the rest of us are reading, or I'm going to read it to you. You can watch me read the book. But instead, I found ways to scaffold in those strategies that are in the book, or a number of those. Some of those are just actively engaging kids in the text. Like, how can I model the reading so that they can also practice that reading? But that equity closes when all kids have access to grade level material. And that how I give them access is going to vary. Some kids need more scaffolding than others. And I might have to do some pre-teaching for some students that I don't need to do for all. And that's how I start to mitigate or minimize those differences between my learners. We have greater learner variability in our classrooms today than probably ever in history. And we as teachers have been told, like, okay, you got to meet the needs of our students, but we don't always get those techniques in our preparation programs or just even in the professional learning we get as in-service teachers. And so supporting our students and accessing grade level instruction is how we close the gap. It's about giving them more of what they can't quite do with the support so they can do it. And over time, I can reduce that scaffolding so that they are able to do it independently on their own and can grow into that grade level or beyond with that support over time.
Can you walk us through some of the research that talks about the importance of having students go through a bit of a stretch when they're reading complex texts?
Absolutely. So there are over 24 studies that have been tested since the early 2000s till now that have shown both in general education and special education settings across typically second grade through 12th grade. So they're from a K-1 space, we have a decodable / kind of grade level reading that we can talk about. But the research is really clear in second grade and up. When you have basic phonics skills, you get better gains by putting kids in more challenging texts. And that level of challenge, there's been a lot of kind of testing. How challenging does it need to be? And the research has pretty great evidence around at least 2 years above. So I'm a fourth grade reader who reads like a second grader. What level of text should I put you in? Fourth grade level text. That seems to be the sweet spot. They've done 2 years, 3 years, 4 years harder, 6 years harder. But what they found is you don't have to go to that high level of frustration to get the result. That 2 years seems to be enough to get you those results, but isn't so hard that it gets overwhelming. But even students in second grade who did 4 years above where they currently were reading had better results than kids who read at their instructional level during that same kind of exercise. So that level of challenge is really helpful in accelerating learning progress. And it's not challenge for the sake of challenge or alone in that challenge journey. Most of those studies were like, how can we scaffold? So sometimes it was teacher scaffolding. Sometimes it was peers. And in peers, the simpleness of partner reading together. We're corally reading together the same book side by side, one more capable reader with one less capable reader, orally reading, and that can produce some huge gains in both reading comprehension, reading fluency, vocabulary development. And so there's just a lot of studies that they have come together around this and people trying, well, what if we change this variable? What if we change this variable? But the common conditions are more challenging text. It's got to be harder than what the kid can do on their own. There needs to be some kind of scaffold, whether that's a peer or a teacher prepping with some background knowledge, a teacher engaging in rereading the text for fluency so that kids can understand more of what they're reading. There's so many ways that we can scaffold. But with those two variables, you get better results. And it's significant. We actually did a pilot study when I was at the state office with dyad reading, which was matching a more capable peer with a less capable peer. And they would read together for 15 minutes, 4 days a week, out loud in the same text. That text would be at least 2 years harder than the less capable reader. And those classrooms got 2 to 3 years of gain in one compared to other classrooms. And that was just really exciting. There was one classroom that didn't get those results. So I went down and watched all of them. I'm like, what is different? When I watched, it was like, it looks like dyad reading. Kids are reading out loud. They're in text. They're with a matched appropriately with an appropriate peer. And then I inquired into the text. And the text was not 2 years above. It was just the grade level text. And so for some kids, it might be 2 years above, but for other kids, it wasn't. And so that lack of challenge actually prevented the gains that all the other teachers got in that trial and that pilot study. And so it just kind of reinforced what we had seen in all these research studies across the nation. But in a lot of states, you can imagine people like to say, does it work here? And so we kind of tested it and it was pretty exciting to see those results. And one of those classrooms was a special ed classroom, and they actually got 3 to 4 years of gain on average for the students in that class. So I want people listening to know this is not just a general ed effort. This can be done in special education. It can be done with students with learning disabilities. It's really saying, where are you currently at and how do I scaffold you into more challenging text? And that challenge can be 2 years plus, and just providing the appropriate scaffolding and reducing that over time as needed.
That is really interesting and really cool to see the gains that students have made. And when you talk about 2 years or more above, some people might be thinking, what are the reading levels then? And if we're not using the Fondle-Simpinel guided reading levels, what do you mean by 2 years above? So can you clarify? I know you talk about it in your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So given what the reading scheme we're using now in terms of leveling, you still need a level for a kid to be able to say, what is 2 years above? But instead of using that level to say, I'm going to match you to that text, I'm actually going to use that level to challenge you from where you currently are. And that's the major difference. So most of us have Lexiles at this point. Acadience has Lexiles, Dibbles has Lexiles, whatever tool people are using. iReady, they all seem to be producing a Lexile score. Lexiles are not an exact measure. They are a range. So 50 above to 100 below. If I'm a 750 Lexile, my independent level might be an 800 to a 650. Lexiles are not as precise, just like when you used to read a level J book. Today, the kids did really well. Tomorrow was like, oh my gosh, maybe they're not a J. And then you go to a J the next day, like, oh, it's fine. Our leveling systems for reading are not as precise as we think they are. But that 2 grade levels above, well, if I'm a 750, kind of looking at those Common Core Lexile levels, I can look and say, oh, generally you jump about 200 to 300 Lexiles to get to your next couple of years ahead. But that is definitely in the book on how to use the Lexiles to say, where is a kid right now? What would be that 2 years above? And that's just the sweet spot. They saw results with kids with 3, 4 years above. They just found that you didn't need to give that much challenge in order for kids to grow. But if I'm a 5th grade teacher and I have 2nd grade readers in my room, I'm still going to put them in 5th grade level text. I'm just going to scaffold that text so they can be more successful in reading what is grade level appropriate for a 5th grader. Because you can imagine a lot of 2nd grade texts are no longer engaging, motivating, topics that they really care and are interested in. And that lack of motivation breeds a continued lack of motivation. But when you give them what's appropriate for their age, they're more engaged, they're more motivated to even try that harder text because it doesn't feel like baby reading, which a lot of kids would like, that's a baby book, because they know they want to do the hard things and they just need someone to help them, support them in doing that.
Definitely. That was really helpful. And you do a nice job in the book at explaining the difference between a challenging text and a connected text and controlled text, thinking all the C's. And you also talk about how decodable texts do fit into the conversation. And as the science of reading movement takes wind, a lot of people talk about the importance of phonics instruction and the importance of decodable texts. And some people are bold to say, throw your leveled text in the garbage. And I'm the first one to say, a leveled book is just a book. These books are still hold value. It's more so those predictable early readers aren't the types that we want to be using with our students who are just learning the code. But once they have the code under their belt, we want them in just regular books, right? But maybe we can swing back to the decodable text conversation. And you talk about how being in decodables is not necessarily the end goal, but as a bridge to more complex reading. So what would an effective decodable text routine look like in practice?
Yeah, and I want to go back to one thing you said before I answer that question. When I was at the state office and moved into this role, I knew leveled reading was not the way. And that was in 2014. And so I came and spoke to our literacy directors, and so many of them took me so literally at like, we're not doing leveled reading. That is not what's going to be most effective. And they went and threw out all of their leveled libraries. And I was like, oh my gosh, not my intention. So I still have some shame over that and some guilt of like the thousands of books that went in the dumpster. So yes, thank you for saying that. It's not about getting rid of them. It's about repurposing them and thinking how we use them differently. And within Decodable, kids, especially in the primary grades, need access to very controlled text such as Decodable that allows them to apply what they've been learning, those isolated phonics skills, into connected text. And connected text is just more than one sentence put together that have meaning when they're joined. And so a lot of us are using some kind of decodable text, whether that's in a little book or just a passage, and that's super helpful, but we're not necessarily getting the return on our investment. And that return is they need to read it multiple times, and they really need to see the transfer of that isolated skill into this connected text. And then ultimately we need to then take it from decodable into like a grade level text where they actually see, oh, although this isn't as controlled as my decodable was, that skill that I just learned about SH says shh is still helpful in this book too. And getting them to generalize, it's not only when we do UFly or whatever your phonics program might be, those skills are really helpful anytime I'm reading. And so decodable is one part of the story, but even in K1, a lot of our core programs. I coach in a lot of schools, and they'll be using HMH, Into Reading, or Wonders, or whatever core program they're using. And we'll do this kind of isolated phonics, but we don't make the direct connection for our kids to say, hey, yeah, we read that Dakota book. Guess what? Our main selection, the puddle puzzle, I just did that one in second grade a few weeks ago, also uses the SH digraph that we've been learning. Why we're doing it today, I want you to be looking for those words. And when you see them, I want you to underline them in the text. And then I'm going to ask you at the end which ones we have found. Like just some simple little moves to make kids understand this isn't only helpful in this really controlled setting, but I can transfer those skills into more complex text. So in terms of a routine, we need to start by like helping the kids take that controlled skill that they've been learning. So if it's SH digraph, to go in and find all the words in our decodable that use that SH digraph. And we don't want to spend a lot of time on this. We just want them to realize the skill we just did in isolation, usually with word level, is now going to be present in the sentence level or passage level text. And I want you to go through and just scan for those SHs so that when we get to them, we are ready to read those and remember, oh yeah, SH says sh, not s. And so the first step is just to have them highlight any of the phonics words that we are learning for that day. So if it was SH, we're going to go through and find rash and shush and whatever the words might be. And we're going to do that first. Then any of the irregular words we've been teaching. So I've been coaching you fly the last 3 days. If you have a heart word, you're going to go through and underline those so that we're trying to say, oh, we also have been learning these irregular words. Let's go see in which ones you can identify in the text we're going to read. Again, just transferring that isolated instructional topic or knowledge into the actual connected text. Once we've done that, and I honestly do like 1 to 2 minutes for finding the SH words and maybe another minute to 30 seconds for finding the sight words or the high frequency words or whatever the program is calling them, irregular words, so that kids, we don't spend a lot of time on that, but it is to make those direct connections to what we've been doing in isolation into this more connected way. Then we are actually going to read the text. So we'll read those words, get ready, prime ourselves, and then we'll move into reading the text. And a lot of times people start with choral reading in decodable, but I prefer to start with whisper. And the reason for that is everything we've done up until this point, they have been taught. A decodable text is, if they're done well, there's very little left to chance that the kid doesn't know. It's going to use a lot of the words they've already been taught before. It's going to use the phonics skills and patterns we've been learning. And so I really want kids to say, I can read this. And so the first step is just whispering it to themselves. Some kids are going to do that faster than others. And so I just have them put up a finger when they, however many times they've gotten through it. And you kind of know who your slower readers are in the room. Do they even need to get through the whole thing, or do they just need to get some practice? So kind of judging and making that judgment call of how long you whisper for. And then I bring them back and we chorally read it together. That way, everybody does get all the exposure to it with the scaffolding of myself as the teacher. And then they actually duet read, and duet read in my world, others might call partner read, but duet is where they both read it together at the same time in one voice. So like they're both reading out loud at the same rate and sticking together the best that we can. This again is where we need to pair our kids strategically, more capable peer with a less capable peer. And that is in the book. Strategic partner is not the rainbow method. It's not list your kids from 1 to 34, which is how many I had in that 4th grade class, but it's actually taking 1 through 34, splitting it in half, and then matching 1 and 17, 2 and 18, and so on, so that you don't get these really disparate partnerships, but you get enough support coming from the more capable peer to support that less capable peer. And then after we do our duet read where they've partnered together, there does need to be a simple comprehension check. Decodables are not rich for meaning. There's not a lot to dig in there, but we do want to help reinforce with our students that we read for meaning. We just didn't read this because we wanted to practice SH. That was one reason. But we wanted to read for meaning. And so we want to do just a quick comprehension check at the end to say, well, what kinds of things did the cat step on, or whatever the story might be? But again, those stories are not rich in language. They're not rich in vocabulary. They're not rich in depth. So those questions can be short and just a few to check in, and then we can move on. But the research supports 3 to 4 reads is really where you get your return on your investment. At about the 4th repeated read, you start to plateau on the benefits. And so I encourage people to get at least through 3 to 4 reads. And after that, some of your students might still benefit, but overall, you're getting to this kind of plateau point in rereading a decodable.
That's great. And I love how you shared about your scaffolds even within the decodable text routine. So the way your book is outlined, you have 25 scaffolding strategies organized before reading, during reading, and after reading. And for the teacher listening, can you clarify, is this for your read aloud, some kind of shared reading experience, some kind of independent / quasi small group experience? When do you envision this being used?
Yeah, for the strategies that they're intended for any time a teacher feels a text needs to be scaffolded to increase student access to that reading material so that they can comprehend. Many of the strategies can be applied in independent reading, but they can't be applied in independent reading until you've taught them. And this kind of goes back to the instructional hierarchy. Once I've taught a skill, so one of the strategies is summarizing, and specifically the peer-assisted learning strategy of paragraph shrinking is in the book. You can't just say, okay, kids, go paragraph shrink. You have to teach it. You have to model it. You have to practice it. And once kids get accurate at that skill from whole group shared reading instruction, then I can say you can do that independently. You can do that with a partner. That one has to be with a partner. It is a peer-assisted learning strategy. But that would be like they can go off and read independently without me being the scaffolding support because they know how to do the strategy. So a lot of the strategies are like that, where kids can take it and do it independently, but you wouldn't automatically just say, for example, graphic organizers is in there. We've all used a graphic organizer. We all know what they are. Most of us do not get the evidence-based effect size that comes from a graphic organizer because most of us don't use them the way you actually have to use one to get the results. Most of us use them as a note-taking device, but not in a way to get kids to actually think through the use of that graphic organizer, how it's organized and why we would use it, all of the things. Anyway, so as we're kind of thinking about the tools that we use, once kids are accurate, they know how to use it, they know its purpose, then we can take it off. But most of these are meant for that shared reading where kids are going to be engaging in the text, and then they can be transferred into independent and small group and partner kind of reading tasks once kids have developed enough accuracy. And I want to just build their automaticity with that skill or that strategy.
Great. And then so maybe we can start with the before reading phase. We know that strong scaffolding, if a student is encountering a complex text, is necessary before we're even opening the book and trying to tackle the words. So what are some of the strategies that you recommend teachers can use before reading?
Yeah, there's 10 before reading strategies in the book. Some examples include activating prior knowledge, like what is the kid bringing to the text already that we can activate and leverage to help them connect with what the story is going to be about. There's building background knowledge. I'm training teachers in November, and we're using a Civil War text for 5th grade. Well, most kids in 5th grade don't have a lot of knowledge about the hospital situation during the Civil War, that it was unsanitary and not to the standards that we would expect hospitals to be at today. And so I'm going to have to build some background knowledge for them to access this really challenging text, the use of amputation and how the Civil War really advanced medical profession. But at the time, at the beginning, we were not in that place. So I'm actually going to have to build some background knowledge because even the word unsanitary is going to be difficult for a lot of 5th graders, although hand sanitizer these days has helped us. I can front load vocabulary where I take some of the key words. I don't need to take all of them. Some of them can be fast mapped. So in the text, if it says dysentery and measles or whatever, I can say those are types of diseases. We can move on, right? They don't need depth in that to get the idea of like, oh, people were sick. But I need to pick those terms that really are critical to understanding and take the time to front load those if they're so essential to understanding the text and comprehending. There's also a strategy on discussing text structure. We underestimate the power of text structure and being able to help kids to understand the text structure. There's an overarching text structure of a text, and then there's also text structure. It can change from paragraph to paragraph, right? But understanding the text structure can really advance comprehension. And it's something that if we did that prior to reading, if we previewed that text structure, that can really elevate student understanding of the text. Well, one of the other ones I'm thinking of is text sets to build knowledge. So in preparation for talking about the Civil War hospitals, we might have already read some other texts on the Civil War. This is a very kind of granular idea about the hospital setting at the time. But if we've read nothing, that totally changes how I prepare the before reading than if we have some background knowledge that we're bringing within to this text. And that's something as teachers, we have to know our kids. We have to know what some of the prior knowledge they might have. And if we're unsure, check it. You might have prepared some background knowledge and you're like, wait, they didn't need it. That's okay. But if you come and think, oh, my kids know I taught in Alaska and we had this text on the desert with these kids in New Mexico that had a radio show. I was like, all right, I didn't anticipate my kids in Alaska didn't know what the desert was. I came from Utah. I knew what the desert was. And because of that lack of anticipation and a radio show, like that's not a thing for kids to podcasts these days might have been more connected. They were just so lost in what was happening in the context. We all struggled and hated that story by the end. And I realized about a couple weeks later, like, oh, they didn't understand some key aspects of it. Had I shown them pictures of the desert, had we talked a little bit about the context of the radio show, they might have had a more enduring feeling for that text, but it was so painful. And that was my lack of thinking about not my experience, but the kids' experience. You know, as teachers, like, oh, this text won't be that hard, but you have to really put yourself in the shoes of the kids that you're serving. And 9 of the strategies are really dependent upon what knowledge learners are bringing to the text. There is one strategy that is used no matter what text you're doing. It is not text dependent or student dependent. It's about telling kids why they're reading the text. What is the purpose? So the number one strategy in the book is establishing a purpose for reading. When kids have clarity about why they're reading, what they're going to do with what they're reading, what they're trying to achieve, what does success look like, you are so much better able to get to that level of success, especially for a striving reader who doesn't know how to filter out what's not important. How is this going to help me with the end goal? If they don't know what the end goal is, everything feels important. And so they can't filter it out and they just get overwhelmed. And so that is a strategy, no matter what text you're using. Tell them what they're going to do with that text so that they can be reading that text with that intention. You will see a marked difference in their filtering out of what's unnecessary to get closer to that actual end destination.
Absolutely. It puts those little antennas on. You're reading with a purpose. I think anytime I do a read aloud, anytime, my last sentence before I start reading is always, we're going to read to see blank. And so it just sets them up
just
with
a little. Yeah, it's not a huge. It takes 1 to 2 minutes, maybe if that, just to lay out, here's what we're doing today. Instead of turn to page T47 and here we go, like just that moment. So I'm glad to hear you're already doing that. I think a lot of teachers miss that. It's a small opportunity. It also helps us to realize, why am I reading this text? Is it just because it was the next story in my basal, or is there an actual purpose of what I want my kids to get out of it? And that's, critical too.
Yeah. And you gave some really great examples already, but can you give us perhaps a bird's eye view of what this could look like in action across one particular text for before reading and then during reading and after reading, some of the scaffolds you might do? And maybe you want to use another example.
Absolutely. So the one that comes to mind is the puddle puzzle. It's in 2nd grade, HMH into reading. Not that that matters, but for those that have that program, it's a drama. It's in a play form. It's the first time a 2nd grader encounters a play. And so as I think about the before reading, what I model is we have to talk about the structure of this text because it is different. How we read it is different. It's going to have a character's name and then it has this colon and then it has some text. And some of that text is in parentheses and is italicized. There's a lot of things there that a 2nd grader is not going to know how to navigate that I need to discuss before we get in there. So when it says Carlos, and I'm trying to think of the other kids' names, I'm just going to make them up, Celeste and blah, blah, blah. They need to realize we don't read that name when we're reading the play. That's just who's speaking. And we read everything that's after that, unless it's in parentheses. And then that's just the action that the person's doing. So it says smiling enthusiastically. Well, we don't actually read that. We make that smile happen in our telling of the story. And so that was one thing in Puddle Puzzle, just the structure of that text being a play that they're unfamiliar with. We took a moment to say, oh, the first page says setting and characters. Well, that's different. Most of the time, the first page of a story is the story. Just being able to kind of point out those differences and that uniqueness of the type of text structure that we're headed into is super helpful for them to be able to navigate that. Another thing I might do is help them to hear what this play sounds like. So I might not play the whole story. I might play a page or two so they can hear the voice changes that happen when you're doing a play versus when you're reading a typical narrative text. We also asked a question of how many of you have played in a puddle? And it's basically a story about 2 kids who are playing in a puddle. They go inside because it's cloudy. They want to go get I think they're getting a snack or something. They come back out and their puddle disappeared. And so they go to this little kid detective agency and say, hey, our puddle disappeared. Can you help us solve the mystery? And so these kid detectives try and solve the mystery of the missing puzzle. There's a puddle involved. It was like, how many kids have played in a puddle? So just asking a little activating knowledge question, kids are like, oh, I've played in a puddle before. And it activates just a little prior knowledge, but it also brings some engagement of like, oh, I want to read about this story because I've had a similar experience. Now, I wouldn't ask an activating prior knowledge question if I didn't think my kids had ever played in a puddle, right? So like thinking about, I want the vast majority of my kids to have had this experience. If I think most kids haven't had that experience, that's not going to be my entry point into this text. So those are a few ways that we kind of got started into the text. And then of course, we established purpose, why we were reading it. And we were really reading it to understand story elements and to be able to summarize the key story elements in this particular text to go with our standards. So it's kind of setting them up for that. Then during reading, we use active reading strategies. So there's several in the book. So there's close, choral, echo, whisper, duet, partner reading, different ways to get kids reading. I am anti-popcorn and anti-round robin reading. And I told people when I came to the state, my job is to get rid of that. And so I really worked hard doing that. And getting rid of it is you have to give replacement strategies. I don't think there's times in classrooms for one kid to be reading at a time, other than for assessment. We just don't have enough hours in the day to give only one kid practice. And so those strategies all require at least 50 to 100% of kids to read at the same time. So really giving more kids the opportunity to practice. And so I would say in this particular text, it's a drama. Well, in a lot of classrooms, one kid would be Connor, one kid would be Celeste. There was 4 characters in the story, and 4 kids would read this text. And maybe if you're lucky, the teacher will be like, okay, we've read a couple pages. I'll pick 4 new people. Instead, I'm going to say table 1, you're Connor. Table 2, you're Celeste. Table 3, you're this. Table 4, you're this. And if I have more than 4 tables, then 2 tables are Connor. It doesn't matter. I want as many kids reading at one time as possible. So the active reading, thinking about how am I going to engage the kids in doing the heavy lifting of reading the text. Because when we have these published programs, those texts, when they are called the student book or the my book or whatever the name of it is meant to be read by the student. And a lot of teachers are taking that opportunity to read it to them because they think it's too hard. But that's where scaffolding comes in. That's where, oh, this is really hard. I might echo read it because I'm going to show them what it sounds like fluently, and then we'll read it together so they get practice. That is a way of scaffolding that doesn't take all of the heavy lifting out of the kids' hands. So that's one thing that we did during there. We also, because our goal was around story mapping, we would pause at different portions of the text and fill in our story map. And as the teacher, I would fill it in because 1, second graders are slow in writing, and my purpose is not for them to like fill in a graphic organizer. My purpose is to get them to thinking about the story elements and how to represent those in a story map so that later we can summarize. And so finally, those are just a couple strategies we do midway. After reading, okay, well, my goal is about asking and answering questions and story maps. So how do I kind of wrap this up to really solidify those concepts? And so what we did is I gave a couple options when I modeled this for teachers. 1, you can have them do a summary of the story where, the setting, the problem, the solution, all those things, but giving them a paragraph frame. And a paragraph frame is just, you've got some of the framing of a paragraph already laid in there, and kids plug and chug the missing portions to create their own. As second graders, they're not ready to summarize in a paragraph all on their own. And so that paragraph frame gives them the scaffolding to learn the components of a summary without having to totally do it independently. And the other strategy we used was somebody wanted but so then, which was another summarization strategy, but allows us to think through, well, who's the someone? That's my character. What did they want? That was my problem. Then what happened? And you kind of work through that scenario to get them to rethink. It's asking and answering questions, but it's also revisiting all those story elements. So just different ways to solidify whatever my purpose was that I set before reading through that end of reading task. But during reading, we were filling out that story map to help us to complete either one of those tasks. So hopefully that's an example that people can kind of think. And you don't need to use that many. I like to show people there's a lot of ways to do this because it's not about being, oh, this is the only scaffolding strategy for this text. It's, you got to know your kids. You need to know what makes that text hard. And then what's your purpose for that text? Like, what are the standards you're trying to achieve? What's the learning outcomes? And then you put that together to determine which scaffolding strategies to bring in to support kids in reading that grade level material.
Yeah. And it's not about just looking at your book and picking out like a menu. Oh, maybe I'll pick one before reading, one during reading, one after reading scaffolding strategy, and I'm all set. I did scaffolds. It's about being responsive to like, what kind of scaffolds do my students need in this moment? And I love your example about the students in Alaska and talking about the desert, and in Utah, you wouldn't have to use that same scaffold. So
absolutely. Yeah. Was observing in a kindergarten classroom in Alaska, and one of the explicit vocabulary words was snow. Friends, they didn't need it. You just point out the window. What's that? Okay, we're moving on. I mean, you have to know your kids, right? Context matters. My kids didn't know desert, but they certainly knew snow. So it really is about, and it's a menu, right? It is choices, but it's intentional choices. And you don't have to do like some of the strategies you could use before, during, and after. Some of them are appropriate during and after. Also, although they're grouped in particular parts, many of them can actually interplay across. I just had to categorize them somewhere. And so I put them where I think they best fit. But there's one that's on like syntactical structures. Well, that could be really helpful during the reading if they're struggling with a particular passage or a particular sentence. I might not wait till after reading to attend to that. I might be like in the moment, like, ooh, great, let's work on this syntactical breakdown so they can understand what's happening. So try and get people to be flexible in their thinking too.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned that setting your purpose in the beginning is one of your go-to scaffolds that you like to do no matter what the book or no matter the genre. Are there any other go-tos that you feel like you heavily rely on often? Or is that the one you would turn to most?
That's number one. But number two for me is the active reading. Like, how do I get more kids doing the work of the actual reading, spend as many minutes in reading instruction actually reading? I think the recent research that came out on the number of minutes kids spend in elementary schools reading is like 1.4. We cannot build readers reading 1.4 minutes a day. And we need to be reading across the content areas. We need to be building knowledge, all of those things. But to actively engage, silent sustained staring is what I call it, SSR, I call it SSS, because it really turns into like, I have kids that don't read well that are so good at like, that seems an appropriate amount of time to turn the page. And you would think they're reading because they've got the timing down, but they aren't reading. And so these strategies require active engagement. Even whisper reading, you can hear if a kid is reading. Silent reading, I truly don't know if they are actively engaging in that text. And we all know the kids who can read well are doing it, and the kids who can't aren't doing it. So how do we make sure, if you want to get better at something, we have to practice. We need to make sure that they're practicing. So active reading engagement is my number two. Once you have clarity on why you're teaching what you're teaching and kids know why you're teaching it, then two is, how do I engage them actively in the reading of the reading? And I think those are my probably top two from the book that are most critical to every lesson. Like, you're always going to actively engage kids in the reading, no matter what the text is, whether it's easy, hard, really difficult, there should be active reading happening.
Yeah, definitely. I love that one as well. And I think that shows the difference too between, this balanced literacy approach that has this long chunk of independent reading time, and there's value in students reading. No one's saying don't read, but needing to make sure that they are doing the active reading, I think, is the bottom line there. And so many kids out of avoidance tactics, pretending to read, looking out the window.
Yeah. And I did all the things. Like, I say these things, like, I did drop everything and read. Totally did it. Kids silently read in my class until I knew better. But when we know better, we have to change. And we've been doing silent reading for decades. There's not a preponderance of evidence that says it works. In fact, it's to the contrary. We have no evidence that it works. So why we still do it? I think it's just challenging our practices, challenging how we were taught. And kids who like to read will read. But kids who don't like to read will do everything they can to look like they're doing it when you're doing those types of activities instead of actually engaging in the work.
Yeah. That's why they need those scaffolds.
Yes.
Sometimes teachers worry about over scaffolding. So do you have any advice there, and when perhaps we should pull back? Or are there moments where you might scaffold a certain group of students if you're doing something whole class and not everyone would get that scaffold.
Yeah. And I'm in hundreds of classrooms every month, and over scaffolding is probably the biggest issue I see. I think we do too much for the kids because we're like, oh, this is hard, or we're running out of time, or whatever it might be. We are doing the heavy lifting, and kids are not benefiting from the instruction. Like, they're watching us do it. Tim Shanahan has a great blog on climbing the mountain and the 4 ways teachers avoid having kids climb the mountain. And the mountain is of reading. We watch it. They watch me do it. They listen to it. I explain it to them. We don't even give them the text. I just explain what would have been in the text. We have these different strategies to avoid kids in actually doing the work. And it's really out of kindness. Like, we're trying to make it easier for them, but that doesn't build their skills. It doesn't build their ability to do that in the long run. And it's just like watching someone climb a mountain. Well, they get to enjoy the view at the top, but it's a different view when you're watching someone do it. You don't get that top of the view vista when you are the one watching from below. So the nice thing about scaffolding is you can start without it and see if the kids need it. And if they need it, you can put it right on. But sometimes I think we bring in the scaffolding thinking, oh, they're really going to have a hard time. And we offer it and they didn't actually need it. And it's like the paragraph frame. If I'm in 5th grade and my kids have been writing summaries for a couple of years, that's going to be unnecessary for most of my kids. That might be helpful for a newer English learner who's more recently getting into academic English. But for most of my kids, that would actually be a crutch that they don't need any longer. And I actually need to take that. And scaffolding is meant to be a temporary support. It is not meant to be, we're in the fall of the school year and we're going to still be doing the exact same scaffolding techniques by the end of the year. I might still be using a paragraph frame for a little while, but over time, I start to take more and more of that frame away to where by the end of the year, they are independently able to produce that paragraph because I've given them so much scaffolding along the way. So let's say I pick up that 20-pound weight again. Let's go back to that weightlifting example. And I can do 2 to 3 reps, and then I get to fatigue because my muscles are not used to this heavier weight or this heavier text. Then my coach is going to put the scaffolding in, but my coach let me do 2 or 3 reps before they put the scaffolding, before my muscles went to fatigue level, right? I can do a few and then maybe the scaffolding comes. It's similar in reading. Let's say I let the kids read the first couple of pages and then ask them questions to see how well they're doing. Well, if they are comprehending, they seem to be getting it. And you can't just ask a couple kids. You need to have them talk in partners and listen in, because a couple kids, the Statue of Liberty kid who always has their hand in the air, is not the kid you check to see if kids are understanding. You have to check a good sampling of kids to know if they're really understanding. But if they're demonstrating sufficient comprehension, then I don't need to add more scaffolding. But if they are lost, well, guess what? We might reread with a purpose. We might, let me give you some background knowledge. I can tell you're really struggling here. I watched a text a few weeks ago that was in a first person. It had I, and the kids were really struggling with figuring out. It had 4 different characters it was talking about, and they weren't quite sure who anyone was. And a teacher was like, okay, point to who this is in the story. And there was 18 different answers in that room, because there was a page with 4 people and a page with 10 people, and there was hands on all the pages. But the kids were lost, and it was an opportunity to say, let's go back and reread that paragraph. Let's talk about who I is, who Anisha is, and whatever the other name was, and help them to identify it, because not understanding who's who in the story was going to disrupt comprehension. But it wasn't necessarily something the teacher had anticipated. And that's okay. You don't have to anticipate all the scaffolding moves, but you have to recognize when kids aren't understanding and bring the scaffolding needed so that they can approach it. So I would rather rely on looking at it in advance and saying, okay, I know my kids are not going to know the word unsanitary for my Civil War piece. I'm going to pre-teach that word. But there might be another word in there I didn't anticipate. And I was like, I can either do a quick teach moment, I can fast map it, or I can go into an explicit vocab routine and then we can go in depth if it's a word that really has that kind of value. So as we're thinking about it, those opportunities to have scaffolding that's planned, and scaffolding is not planned, but we have to reduce it. It's meant to be temporary as our kids demonstrate more confidence with the skills that they're acquiring.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it really just shows that there always is going to be this art of teaching, and we have to know when to make the right instructional move and when it's okay to pivot from the lesson plan.
I always tell people try it without And if they need it, you're ready, right? If you didn't look at it in advance and you're like, have no idea what would be hard about it, you're not setting them up for success, nor yourself, because it's hard to just come up with scaffolds just at the ready until you get a lot of practice at it. Then you're like, oh, I'll throw this in and we'll try this. But even that may not work. You might be like, okay, we're going to come back to this tomorrow, and you might have to rethink it. We really need to think, how do I take it off? Maybe I put it on the first couple of pages. We use that scaffolding, and I slowly take out how much teacher scaffolding I have in that across the text. That might even work too. I think it's just realizing it's not meant to be a permanent support.
Definitely. And I love how you circled back in the beginning to the workout example again. And maybe we can circle back as well to this notion of equity and access as well. And for the teacher who just listened to all of this wonderful information and they're having trouble balancing that notion of equity with the reality of all of these diverse learners in their room. Maybe they have multilingual learners. Maybe they have readers who are so many grade levels below and struggling with the code. What kind of advice do you have to give them?
I think there's a balance of like, you continue to teach the code. We need kids to have that access, but that can't be the only thing I offer. Going back to the multilingual progress in Alaska, we remediated in the phonics skills those kids needed. We taught the code, but we also gave them access to grade level text. We didn't choose one. We did both. And that really allowed for those students to accelerate. They were getting the gaps that they had filled, but we weren't building new gaps by keeping them outside of core instruction, by keeping them from accessing grade level concepts and vocabulary. So it really is about, how do I provide them all the things, both what those remediation opportunities, along with the opportunities to grow as a reader, to grow as a fourth grader or eighth grader or whatever grade they might be in. And there's similar results for that front-loading impact of, let's pre-teach some of the things that we think they're going to need to have greater access before they get into the whole group instruction. Same with learners that are struggling readers. What's going to be difficult about this text that I might pre-teach before we access it in whole class? One of the simple things we did was we would have kids listen to the story in advance of the whole group instruction. That didn't take any teacher direction. They had the book in front of them. They would listen and they would track as they were reading, but they would hear it on Monday when we were going to read it on Tuesday. So they had some general access to the text prior to the actual instruction. And that's helpful for a striving reader. That's helpful for a multilingual. That's just use. I mean, all kids can benefit from hearing the story in advance. And it doesn't keep them from having to do the heavy lifting tomorrow. It really gives them just another opportunity to practice and put what they do have coming into the story now into better practice. But the power in this work is the teacher. It's what can we bring to support that child so that they can be successful in this text, and finding ways to give them that access so that we're not building future gaps while we're also remediating current gaps.
Definitely. We need to accelerate that progress. And for the teacher who's interested in raising up readers and utilizing these scaffolds in their work, what's one practical step that you have to offer them in getting started?
I think the first main thing is the belief that all kids can be grade level readers and that they can read grade level text. And until we have that belief, even if you have to fake it, I think some of us, you have a few kids in your room that you're like, they can't even read CVC words. How are they going to access grade level text? And I've had teachers say that to me. And then we talk about these strategies and they're like, okay, I see it now. They just don't know what that looks like. And so first is the belief. And once that belief is in place, or at least the willingness to say, I'll trust you, I'll give it a go, then you can think about, what is it going to take? Take that challenge for your students and design your instruction to mitigate those challenges so that students will have to work at it. There's still going to have to be some effort. I can't lift that 20-pound rate only because the coach pushes me all the way up. They're just giving me just enough of a push to get there. But it's achievable at the same time. So we don't want to make it so hard that they can't do it. But what scaffolds do I put in that they had to actually work at it? They got a little sweaty, but they were able to do the thing with the support that was provided.
That's beautiful. And there is research saying when teachers have high expectations, students often come to the challenge.
I often do that research when I give these presentations because I want people to understand you are the number one factor in a kid's success. Teachers are the number one factor, and that estimates of student achievement is such a high effect size that if you just had the belief, and like I say, if you have to fake it till you get to the actual belief, that has such a huge impact on student learning and their potential. But it has the same negative effect. If you don't believe a kid can, they won't. And the research is super strong in that too. So why not believe they can and have that opportunity so that they really can make that achievement?
Yeah, 100%. And so this has been such a wonderful conversation. We're definitely going to link Raising Up Readers in the show notes. I hope all listeners get an opportunity to check it out and grab it. It really is filled with so much practical, teacher-friendly information. And where can my listeners connect with you further if they're interested in learning more or hearing about your consulting services?
Absolutely. So I have a website. It's impactfullearningdesigns.com. That's the name of my company. And just there's some resources on there. There's the book study guide for the book if people want to do a book club. I've had enough people ask, like, do you have anything? So I've just made something. It seems to be working. I've gotten good feedback on it. LinkedIn, I'm on there, just Jennifer Throndsen. And then Instagram, if you want to get a little both like fun. I'm a traveler. I've been to 55 countries and you want to see my travels, but also like the literacy stuff I put out, they both are together on there. And so if you're like, I just want the professional stuff, LinkedIn is your space. If you're like, oh, I'd love to see your trip to Poland in December, then JT_travel32 on Instagram. You'll get the literacy stuff you'd get on LinkedIn, but you'll also get more of the personal like travel experiences. Like the penguins in Antarctica. I mean, who doesn't want to see penguins in Antarctica?
Build my background knowledge. I love it.
Exactly.
I love the travel too. And I love the part of your bio where you talked about your goal in going to 80 countries, is it?
Yep. 80 by 80. I made it to 40 by 40 and all the continents by 40. And so you got to have goals. And so I'm at 55 on my goal to 80. I'm at 40. I'm 43 years old. So I've got some time, but I'm working towards it.
So I love traveling as well. I haven't done much travel since I've had kids, but I backpacked Europe in college. And then I was telling you before we hit record, I'm 100% Polish. So I've been to Europe several times. We didn't have a lot of money, but my parents always encouraged any opportunity to travel, like you go. So I'm probably in the 20s, but now that I read your goal, I'm like, I want to make a goal.
Goals. You got to have goals. I had a friend that did the 40 by 40 because she was inspired, and like 50 by 50. I'm trying to do all 50 states by 50 because I have not done all the 50 states. So like, you got to have goals. Fun. Professional and fun goals.
There you go. Well, it was so wonderful to connect, and I can't wait to talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. It's been so fun just to chat about reading and encouraging that we can do hard things. Let's go.
Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.